There was a time when communism set the world on fire. From the crowded factories of Europe to the vast fields of Asia, millions rose up in the name of equality, justice, and revolution. Red banners swept across continents. Leaders proclaimed the dawn of a new era, without kings, without classes, without chains. But today, the same ideology is spoken of with totalitarianism, fear, and anger. The slogans that once inspired are now seen as lies. How did a movement that once claimed to speak for the oppressed become one of history's greatest warnings? Welcome to mindgap. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more interesting content. In the 19th century, Europe was undergoing a violent transformation. Factory smokestacks pierced the skies. The roar of machines drowned out the countryside. With the Industrial Revolution in full swing, wealth flooded into the hands of a few, while millions of workers toiled endlessly in filthy workshops, trading their lives for a crust of bread and a straw mattress. The gap between rich and poor widened like a growing wound. Class tensions were simmered and ready to explode. Out of this landscape of misery, the labor movement was born. At first, workers fought simply for higher wages, shorter hours, and basic dignity. But soon, a more radical idea began to echo across the European continent. Perhaps the problem wasn't within the system. Perhaps the system itself had to fall. In 1848, a slim booklet burst onto the scene. It was called the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, two German thinkers, took the scattered anger of the working class and forged it into a coherent weapon of theory. They taught that history was not a series of random events, but a relentless struggle between classes, the oppressors and the oppressed. They argued that capitalism, by its very nature, would deepen inequality, alienate workers from the fruits of their labor, and eventually collapse under its own contradictions. Their vision was revolutionary. Private property would be abolished. The means of production, factories, land, capital, would belong to the people. Society would transition through a temporary dictatorship of the proletariat, and ultimately evolve into a stateless, classless world. True communism. They offered a breathtaking promise to the oppressed. You have nothing to lose but your chains. You have a world to win. In an era crushed by machines and ruled by privilege, those words spread like wildfire, igniting hope, anger, and revolution across the globe. It wasn't long before the winds of revolution began to sweep through Russia. Russia, a vast and archaic empire ruled by Tsar Nicholas II, was ripe for change. Beneath the surface, the anger of the peasants, the workers, and the soldiers simmered. Poverty and oppression were rampant. The Russian people had long lived under a feudal system, where the nobles enjoyed vast wealth and power, while the masses struggled to survive. So, Vladimir Lenin entered the historical stage. As a disciple of Marx, Lenin took the revolutionary ideas of the manifesto and put them into action. He and his Bolshevik party believed that the time was now. The workers would not wait forever. In 1917, during the chaos of World War I, the people's dissatisfaction boiled over in Russia. The Tsar was overthrown in the February Revolution. But what followed was far from peaceful. Lenin and the Bolsheviks seized this moment of instability, overthrowing the provisional government in the October Revolution of 1917. The world watched as Lenin's forces stormed the Winter Palace, and the communist flag was raised high. A new government was born, one that promised to dismantle the old order and build a society based on Marxist principles. The dictatorship of the proletariat had begun. But the path to this new world was not smooth. Civil war erupted across Russia, with Bolsheviks fighting against both internal enemies and foreign intervention. The Red Army, under the command of Leon Trotsky, faced off against the White Army, a coalition of monarchists, capitalists, and other anti-revolutionary forces. For years, Russia was engulfed in chaos and bloodshed. Despite the horrors of the Civil War, the Bolsheviks held firm. By 1922, the Soviet Union was officially established, a one-party state with the Communist Party at its helm. Lenin's dream of a classless society was now a reality, but at a steep cost. The new regime imposed strict control over every aspect of life, with dissent ruthlessly crushed. The promise of a utopian society was now governed by fear, secrecy, and the constant struggle for power. The October Revolution did not stay confined to Russia. It sent shockwaves across the globe. For the first time in history, a government claiming to rule in the name of the laborers had seized power and survived. To the oppressed masses of the world, it was a beacon of hope. To the rulers of the old order, it was a chilling warning. Communist movements sprang up almost overnight. Revolts in Germany, Hungary, and Italy. Uprisings from Latin America to Southeast Asia. Most of these early revolutions were crushed. But the idea, the intoxicating vision of a world without kings, capitalists, or empires, had taken root. In Asia, the impact was profound. China's centuries-old imperial system had already collapsed by 1912, plunging the country into chaos. Amid warlords, foreign powers, and endless suffering, new ideas began to spread. Young revolutionaries like Mao Zedong saw in Marxism not just a theory, but a roadmap for liberation. In Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh studied Lenin's works and dreamed of freeing his country from French colonial rule. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union sought to export its revolution. Through the Comintern, the Communist International, they funded, trained, and coordinated radical movements around the world. Under Stalin's iron rule, it expanded its influence across Eastern Europe. Puppet governments, backed by Soviet tanks, turned entire nations into satellite states. In 1949, across the globe, another giant awoke. Mao Zedong proclaimed the birth of the People's Republic of China. 1/5 of humanity now lived under communist rule. The dominoes began to fall. North Korea, North Vietnam, Cuba. The communist bloc kept growing. As communism spread, fear spread across the Western world too. The fear was simple and primal. If we don't fight it, communism will destroy us and conquer the world. Western powers, especially the United States and Britain, saw in the Soviet Union a mortal threat to their way of life. They decided to fight the Red Tide. On March 5, 1946, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, in a speech at Fulton, said an iron curtain had descended across the continent. The world was splitting into two camps. On one side, the communist bloc, led by the Soviet Union, dreaming of global revolution. On the other, the capitalist bloc, led by the United States, determined to contain the Red Tide. Though World War II was away, the seeds of the next great conflict, the Cold War, had already been sown. For the next few decades, the United States and the Soviet Union competed for hegemony. Though the United States and the Soviet Union never fought directly, they clashed through proxy wars, espionage, propaganda, and the constant, looming threat of nuclear annihilation. From Berlin to Korea, from Cuba to Vietnam, the battle lines were drawn. Every revolution, every civil war, every coup was seen through the lens of this titanic struggle. And yet, even as communism seemed poised for ultimate triumph, cracks had already begun to form. Beneath the surface, serious problems have arisen in communist states. First, communism was built on the dream of unlimited abundance. A world where everyone's needs could be met easily, and conflict would vanish. But human civilization simply hadn't reached that level of material wealth. Scarcity remained, and so did competition, inequality, and hardship. Over time, the public simply stopped believing. Empty slogans could not fill empty stomachs. The grand promises of communism rang hollow, and the people's trust crumbled. Second, communism underestimated human nature. Communism emphasized equal distribution regardless of ability, which greatly reduced individuals' enthusiasm for work and made economic development more difficult. Third, communist systems demanded one-party rule. The Communist Party held absolute power, unchecked and unaccountable. Inevitably, corruption flourished. Officials served themselves, not the people. Fourth, the regimes made by Communist Party leaders lacked real feedback mechanisms. In healthy societies, bad policies can be challenged, revised, overturned. But in communist states, dissent was crushed. Systems became rigid, marching stubbornly toward disaster, unable to adapt. The dream of communism had promised equality, brotherhood, and liberation. But as the decades passed, reality told a different story. In the Soviet Union, the state grew bloated and corrupt. The planned economy became a labyrinth of inefficiency. Scarcity, not abundance, became the new normal. Innovation withered. Cynicism thrived. In China, Mao Zedong launched radical campaigns. The Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, which led to catastrophic famine, persecution, and chaos. Tens of millions perished. The very society communism had sworn to uplift was torn apart. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge slaughtered nearly a quarter of their own population, because the leader Pol Pot believed that intellectuals and cities were harmful to communism. In North Korea, Kim Il-sung made himself into a North Korean god, and since a dynasty of terror was born. Meanwhile, the capitalist world evolved. Western economies boomed, and living standards rose. Technology advanced at a pace the communist bloc could not match. By the 1980s, the communist world was stagnating. Behind the grand speeches and military parades, entire systems were rotting from within. Mikhail Gorbachev's attempts to reform the Soviet system, but it came too late. Rather than saving communism, Gorbachev's reform hastened Soviet's collapse. In 1989, the great symbol of division, the Berlin Wall, fell. In 1991, the Soviet Union itself dissolved. The once powerful hegemony came to an end. A century after Marx and Engels first imagined a workers' paradise, their vision lay in ruins. As the Soviet Union fell, most communist states collapsed with it. Eastern Europe raced toward democracy and capitalism. The Soviet Empire disintegrated into 15 independent nations, many scrambling to find a new identity. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge was overthrown. In Vietnam and Laos, the ruling parties clung to power, but quietly shifted toward market economies. Cuba, isolated and impoverished after losing Soviet support, entered its own special period of hardship. North Korea chose a different path. It sealed itself off from the world entirely, descending into extreme totalitarianism and famine. To this day, it remains a tragic relic of a bygone era. But one nation charted a very different course: China. In 1978, even before the Cold War ended, the new leader of Chinese Communist Party Deng Xiaoping launched a radical transformation: socialism with Chinese characteristics. The Communist Party retained absolute political power, but began to embrace the capitalist market to boost its economy. Factories were privatized. Special economic zones attracted foreign investment. Entrepreneurs flourished. Millions were lifted out of poverty. In effect, China abandoned orthodox Marxism, without abandoning the Communist Party. It became a hybrid system. Authoritarian politics fused with capitalist economics. In 2001, China officially joined the WTO. This gamble paid off. While most communist states crumbled, China rose to become the second largest economy in just 20 years. It was a transformation that Marx and Engels could scarcely have imagined, and it reshaped the global order forever. When we look closely, the failure of communism becomes clearer and more human. It wasn't just about bad luck or bad leadership. It was rooted in deeper, unavoidable realities and human nature. Today, communism as a political force has largely faded. Most countries that once embraced it have either collapsed, transformed, or quietly moved on. Only a handful of states still officially fly the red flag, and even they have changed beyond recognition. Yet the core desire behind communism, the dream of a fairer, more equal world, has never truly disappeared. Every new generation rediscovers the same questions. Why are so many still left behind? Why does wealth pile up in so few hands? And some may question, could communism ever be achieved? Perhaps, in Marx and Engels' original vision, communism was not supposed to emerge from poor, undeveloped societies. It was meant to arise in the wealthiest, most industrialized nations, where capitalism had already created immense material abundance. Only when the forces of production reached their full potential, they argued, could humanity move beyond scarcity, and thus beyond class struggle. Communism, in their eyes, was the final stage of human social evolution, a society built not on deprivation, but on surplus. Ironically, history would unfold in exactly the opposite way. The first major communist revolutions would take place not in rich countries, but in poor, agrarian ones, starting with Russia in 1917. I believe communism will come true someday, but not today, and it will not come through slogans, or force, or utopian fantasies. It will come through steady progress, innovation, and the hard, patient work of building better systems. Until then, we live in the imperfect world we have. And perhaps that too is a kind of freedom. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and leave your comment. This is mindgap. See you in the next video.